And thanks, Anthony, for organizing this. So great. I'm really excited. And thanks to the people who I know, I see some familiar names who are here. So yeah, thanks for coming. I'll just take a moment to situate myself. So I'm originally from London. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm currently work at the New School, which is on the traditional lands of the Lenape, the Manhattan, the Canarsie, the Shinnecock, the Recrewank, the Munshi, and the Haudenosaunee Nation. And I live close to Weeksville, which is a site of historic and continued Black community and struggle since the 19th century. So that's where I am. And yeah, Malcolm, so many questions for you, but let's maybe start with a broad one, which is, how do you understand decolonial ecology? I ask this in the context of your book, but also because the term decolonial and decolonizing often gets used quite freely within academia. So it's good for us to be precise about what we mean, especially considering different contexts. So yeah, if you could just give us a kind of brief overview of what you mean by decolonial ecology, and perhaps you want to talk about some of your work on the ground that you've been doing around this as well.
So first of all, thank you, Romy. Thank you, Anthony, for organizing this. Thank you, Romy, for accepting to be the interlocutor in this presentation, and thank you to all the people here that are connecting from different places, including the Caribbean. One from St. Lucia. I was very happy about that. So to go straight into it, I have titled my book Decolonial Ecology, and indeed, as Romy said, there are oftentimes confusions between the term decolonizing ecology and decolonial ecology. So to me, decolonial ecology is a proposition that I made in this book, where I argue for an understanding of ecological issues and socio-political issues that has not separated. So the imperative to preserve the ecosystem, to limit the pollutions and the biodiversity loss, I argue that these should be thought together with the quote-unquote decolonial demands, the anti-racist groups that want equality, that want to be treated fairly, and the goal to think of them together is what I call decolonial ecology, put it broadly. So the reason why I made this proposition is because, and I'm not the first one to make this, but the reason why I made this proposition precisely in the context of France, which maybe we'll talk about later, is because usually and historically, ecological issues have been thought as separate from anti-racist movement, from Afrofeminist demands, and even to some extent for the struggle against discriminations, even women and men discriminations. And so that's why I felt it was necessary to suggest this different way of looking at ecological issues. On the other hand, the second part of your question, which was, what about decolonizing ecology? Now, it is a term that I'm not using per se, and actually I have not titled my book Decolonizing Ecology. The reason why is because of the, let's say, the movement that it implies. Sometimes people here today will think, okay, you have a set understanding of what ecology is, and the task would be to decolonize it. That means to do some makeover, to add something, usually some colors, and then you are awakened, and then you are decolonized, and then you're good to go. And in doing so, it presents the issue as if the existing institutions, organizations are already valid. They just need to be reformed, modified a little bit. Whereas what I call for is for the recognition of other point source of ecological discourse, of other discourses that exist and that should be taught or included in the conversation or with exchanges. One very disturbing example is when you have, and I've talked with some of them, for example, French ecological NGOs that said, okay, we haven't worked in impoverished suburbs around Paris, so let's go there now, and then we'll be decolonized. Instead of, okay, how about we encounter and interact and talk with the people that are already there, that know their suburbs more than us, and that also have an understanding of what it means to engage in ecological actions, what it means to live and inhabit this world from these places. And so that's why I'm more in favor of recognizing the plurality of decolonial ecologies, rather than simply having this reform idea of decolonizing ecology.
Oh, great. Thank you. And maybe we can circle back later to talking about the organization you've been setting up. But first, I wanted to ask you, you use the word encounter, and that's a really important term in the book. And so maybe you could speak a little bit about how you're using that term, but also whether I was right in feeling, as I read this book, whether I was right in feeling that it's really a work of ethics in many ways. So one of the kind of common tendencies that you're arguing against, it's say, particularly in the history of abolition, but also in animal ethics, or is the move of putting ontology before or prior to ethics. So having to show that Black people count as human in certain terms before worthy of, say, freedom or recognition. And similarly, having to show that animals are sentient in a certain way before they might be worthy of, freedom or recognition. So yeah, I felt like there was a strong kind of, I don't even know if it was an undercurrent, but in many ways this was a work of ethics. So whether that resonates with you, and then more concretely how you're using the term encounter in the book.
So thank you for the question. Maybe I will start with the second part of the question, the word encounter. So my book is divided into 4 parts, and the 4 parts details or present what I've called the politics of encounter. And in many ways, because I start my book by making the division or pointing to this double fracture that Anthony talked about, that you have a body of work, scholars, literature, bibliography that engages with ecological and environmental issues, but not with anti-colonial, decolonial, post-colonial, and anti-racist issues, and vice versa. And that divide is the start of my book. And in many ways, I'm trying to bridge this divide, to go over. And so, and it implies, in a way, encountering both the theories and the people. So that's one way of looking at it. But more importantly, one of the question I asked is, what would be a non-colonial way of being in relation with one another? Whether that other is a human being or a non-human being. And so it means a particular, in my opinion, the answer to colonization is not the fact that all of us should stay in our respective corners of the earth, but rather understanding what it would mean to encounter, to meet the other, and what kinds of conditions are necessary for such encounter to take place with dignified, in a dignified manner, in a humane, in a just, fair. So, and I actually, I'm inspired by Aimé Césaire, this famous poet and philosopher from Martinique, who has politically defended this political path of these overseas territories of France. As you know, France still has the remains of the colonies that are called today Department of de France, overseas territories. And Aimé Césaire was very criticized because he defended such path. But one could look at his position as a way of saying, well, the relationship that we build with one another is the condition for equality demands. I hope it makes sense, but it's basically trying to imagine that it's possible to meet the other in a different way than what 1492 and the colonial encounter showed. And so to do so, as you correctly pointed out, Romy, it implies, and that's my feeling too, it implies putting ethics before ontology. It implies making a move that is different from what the abolitionists made. The abolitionists made, in many ways, used this very important study of what a human being is and tried to answer the question, oh, are these people from Africa with a dark skin, are they men? And you know, with the famous medallion by Joshua Walkwood, am I not a man or brother? And there is a version, am I not a woman and a sister? And although maybe I think it started from a good intention, the fact that they wanted to stop and end slavery, it does present the ethics of a relationship you have with someone as dependent upon an answer to what that someone or that person is. And that is problematic. And that's why I'm arguing putting ethics before ontologies, but also I'm inspired also by people like Henry David Thoreau, who showed a different path to it. But no, maybe we can go into more details in the discussion.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for that beautiful answer. And I think it takes me to my next question, which is your relationship, or the book's relationship, with philosophy, which was, this is a deeply philosophical book. It's one that engages with the history and a range of figures in what, in the Anglophone world, we call continental philosophy, from Husserl to Arendt. It's also self-consciously, you're situating yourself within Africana philosophy as well. Towards, in the closing pages of the epilogue, philosophy suddenly has this really important role, it seems, where, I'll just read a brief passage. Opening up, you say, opening up other understandings of the world, other epistemes, other philosophies, other possibilities for understanding the first Mother Earth and those who are torn away from her, plays a part in recovering the son of Africa. And recovering the son of Africa, you say, and perhaps you can explain that in a moment, but is crucial for what you call worldly ecology, which in some ways is the ultimate horizon that you're moving towards in your book. So philosophy makes this appearance again in this kind of really, I think, important way in the final page of the epilogue, particularly in kind of countering the lie and fantasy that Africa was, a place without, and is a place without reason and its own philosophical traditions. So, general question, I suppose, is it important to you that this book be read as philosophy by philosophers? Is that important? And kind of more specific question is, what role does or can philosophy play in what you call a worldly ecology?
I would not presume to tell the readers how they should read the book. So if you want to read it as a piece of environmental politics, as a piece of literature writing to some extent, as a piece of philosophy, and I actually try to do a bit of all of these above. And to write this book, in France, I had to accept or let go the idea of defending this work as a classical philosophy work. Actually, when I did my dissertation, my PhD dissertation, I was told that the kind of subject that I was working on are not considered or are put into question whether they are philosophical or not. And you have two subjects, both coloniality, decoloniality, and to this day is it's more accepted in literature schools than in philosophy. And then you have the issue of the environment or ecology, which now has been actually more apprehended as a form of environmental ethics. But the crossing of these two, not so much. So because I wanted to think, I wanted to use philosophy, and my goal was not to have it accepted as a philosophical work, even though philosophy to me has a huge importance. Of course, I'm in constant dialogue in the book with many philosophers, even though I use different methods also. And I go through philosophers that have been linked to ecological issues, such as Rousseau, Thoreau, but even more recent ones, people like Bruno Latour, for example, is one of them. And so the issue is, so the main focus of the book deals with the ideas and the thoughts and the way we think about ecology. But the kind of subterranean ambition goes beyond ecology, because it is how can we produce knowledge about certain topics that have been willingly or not willingly excluded from philosophy courses and from academia. And I believe, and even in the history of philosophy, I believe that colonialism, and particularly the history of slavery, has yet to be fully understood in terms of the type of thoughts and the type of conceptions and in a way, philosophy that the enslaved had to adopt, practice, and has yet to be recognized as such. And this will go into all sorts of different subjects, not just regarding ecology, but regarding the way we spirituality, the way we relate to one another, the way we live, the way we inhabit the earth, really. So the issue and the difficulty I had, or the difficulty I faced in writing this book, is if I wanted to do a philosophical essay on ecology from a Eurocentric point of view, then I would have many references to look at. Working from the Caribbean world, which is a subtitle of the book, I could not find such philosophical work at the time. There were many philosophical intuitions in literature. I think of Jacques Roumain in Haiti, I think of Edouard Glissant, I think of other writers, of course. And so I had to make use of different type of materials to kind of lay down this philosophy. Novels, even if it's not present in the book, I also did a lot of interviews with local NGOs, trying to see what their ideas were. And when you start wondering, okay, why is it that you could not find at the time a philosophical work on Caribbean ecology, for example? Or why is it that you would be led to believe that the Caribbean has not really produced a philosophy? And I think there are many works about this question, like work of Henri Paget, Afro-Caribbean philosophy, and Lewis Gordon, of course. And then you realize that it has been institutionalized, that some knowledge philosophy would only come from European institution, European person. And that's where Africana philosophy and other post-colonial and decolonial theory comes handy. It allows to change the focus, change the place from where the discourse, the knowledge, and the philosophy is produced. Yeah.
Yeah, no, great, thank you. And it wasn't supposed to be a trick question to get you to tell people how to read your work. And also, well, we may have an audience of philosophers. I don't know, maybe a wider audience today. But yeah, so I mean that's something I've also encountered as, I guess, a problem, is how to bring out philosophical intuitions from work that isn't written strictly in the form of philosophy. But at least for me, one thing I've been wrestling with is how to do that in a way that is not extractive. So how to read, engage with practices, struggles on the ground, art as well as spirituality, as you rightly said, in a way that doesn't distill the philosophical core and then repurpose it and repackage it in a way that is palatable to academia. So that's something I've been struggling with in terms of kind of finding that archive. Okay, fab. So I'd like to, shift a little bit now to thinking about the wonderful feminist vein that runs throughout your work. Which I was very pleased to see. It's fairly consistent and manifests in a number of ways. So you're engaging with, sorry, I'm on a kind of not flat floor, so I keep sliding around, sorry. So what's happening? You're engaging with a number of eco-feminist and eco-womanist figures. You're also attending to issues of reproductive injustice, for example, with the chlordacone scandal in Martinique, which for those who don't know, I suggest you Google it, but also essentially the French government was in cahoots with local planters, knowingly poisoning people, particularly in Martinique, with a pesticide that they knew was toxic and had been banned in the EU for decades. So yeah, issues of reproductive injustice manifest there. And also you're consistently kind of attending to issues of racialized gender and sexuality and how the kind of misogynistic heteropatriarchy that we see in what you call colonial earth inhabitation, that isn't accidental to colonial earth inhabitation, but is really fundamental to it, to the point that you coined the term matricide to name this as a kind of constitutive element of colonial earth inhabitation, which is both violence against those gendered as women, particularly non-white colonized women, but also violence against Mother Earth and kind of in a way that does fundamental violence to our bond with Mother Earth. And then you kind of develop this beautiful concept of matrigenesis, which I really just wanted to invite you to speak about. It's particularly in the context of Maroons that you developed the concept of matrigenesis, but I thought it was such a lovely, alternative to subversion of some of the ordeals with death that we have in some kind of masculinist anti-colonial thinkers, where an ordeal with death, a kind of confronting and risking death, is key to anti-colonial freedom in many, say, for example, in Fanon. But that's conceptualized more in terms of combat, struggle, and here what you offer is quite different, although it's very much still bound up with freedom. So yeah, I just wanted to invite you to talk a little bit about matrigenesis and also how you see, say, womanism functioning in your work.
Well, great question. As a starting point, if I were to give a picture of where I'm speaking from, and the kind of shift that I'm trying to make. One would say, I would say that many, let's say, anthologies of environmental thoughts will start with two people, Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 18th and Henri David Thoreau. And my point is that at the same time as these two white men, well-educated, were moving around, perceived to be pristine nature, there were men, women, and children enslaved in the hold of slave ships. And I wanted to situate myself, like many of my ancestors, in these holds and act with the firm belief that these people also had an idea of what it means to inhabit the earth and to live with one another or not to live with one another. And in doing this shift, I offer different concepts and different tools to analyze situations today, including the ecological crisis. And that's where the terms matricides and matrogenicides come from. This is why they come. But before going further into matrogenesis, regarding the kind of feminist perspective that I try humbly to adopt, and that's the thing. I think as a man, I think we have to proceed with humility, knowing that our experience is not that, and my experience is not that a woman. That means that we not have the same understanding of many issues. But I did realize in my upbringing that I was taught to have a male gaze, including on the history of slavery. If you take an example, I was led to believe in 1848, that's the second abolition of slavery in France, that the enslaved were free and they could vote. And that was true for men. And yet I was still keeping this date, 1848, as the date. And then I think again of, and that's feminist, you know, when you are anti-colonialist or you are for freedom and equality, you think, of course, I'm for freedom for women also. And you think but it's not. And so my feminist perspective was also a method, in a sense that I wanted in all my situation chapters to ask this question: is what I'm saying, would it make sense for women? Does it apply? And just asking the question is a step that I suggest. Then the answers and the possibility to answer these questions are manifold. One example would be that of Wangari Maathai, this Nobel Peace Prize winner who created the Green Belt movement to stop desertification in Africa. She was from Kenya, but I was very moved by her autobiography when she said that in the anti-colonial struggle in Kenya, both the colonial forces and the anti-colonial forces were engaging in aggression and dominating practices against women. So that's one thing. I think we should always ask this question. Now, regarding, I felt that regarding matrogenesis, I felt that the task to me was not only the one of describing the domination and the practices that happens throughout history. Matricide allows me to do that. It's not that we, when I say we, I meant the transshipped people from Africa, and many of us have not been able to own land. We have been enslaved. We have been dehumanized and demeaned. It's also the fact that we have been prevented from making this new land, a motherland, and so that means that these lands in the Americas, especially in the Caribbean, were perceived to be the motherlands of no one, or more exactly, that the indigenous peoples that were living there before, because collectively most of them are no more because of a genocide. We still have some groups in Dominica and sometimes Saint Vincent and the Garifunas in the and we have the traces in our blood, of course. But that means that because we've been brought there from Africa, from Europe, and from India, from China, that somehow the motherland would be somewhere else. And this land will be motherless. And in terms of ethics, it does sometimes maybe facilitate the exploitation because this connection is not made. And I think one of the problems we have to this day is not just the socio-political condition, but it's the fact that we, as Glissant would say, we have not been able to make this land our motherland to this day. And so I take an inspiration from the numerous examples of Maroons who not only manifested a firm, a strong, powerful opposition to slavery, but also to this particular way of inhabiting the land that I call colonial inhabitation, a way that is dominated by extractivism, by plantations, with different works for men and women, different conditions. And so the Maroons were the enslaved that fled the plantations and tried most of the time and tried to live in secluded places, hills, mangroves, mountains. And they created a different relation with the environment, a relation in which they knew that they had to live with the space and the environment they were living in. And in a sense, they're caring for the environment, not the environment per se, but they're caring for the trace nature of the land, would be the conditions for their success at surviving. And of course, many Maroons also found alliances with some of the remaining Native Americans or indigenous peoples who showed them some of the way to the lands. And so there was a way also to recreate this motherly relation, not motherly in the sense of essentializing mother, but this nurturing, caring relation with the land. And I wanted to offer these different concepts, not just as a way to paint a horizon, not just to stay in the colonial, decolonial, colonial, and technocratic, but what would it look like if we were to paint a truly beyond coloniality horizon of the world? Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Got so many more questions, but I think we should move to hear from some other people. So I'm going to go to the Q&A. Okay. Okay, so please could you elaborate or share what it might be to do philosophy or social action as rising up from the hold of the ship? Oh, I'm sorry, there's an addendum. Can you explain what the various ships and their images are doing in the book? Maybe that is related to how you do philosophy.
This is an anonymous.
Anonymous.
Yeah. But I like to really thank this question. And I forgot to say it at the start, but so my book was published in France in 2019. And it has been translated this year by Anthony Paul Smith. And so I want to thank him for his work. And there is a foreword by Angela Davis, and I also want to thank her for that. But when you take the book, you would see that at the start of each chapter, there's 17 chapters. I tell the story of a slave ship, a true historical slave ship, using some of the archives that I've been able to see. And I tell the stories, the route of this slave ship, using the archives, but also I tell them with some freedom, in a manner that will shed some light into the coming chapter. And why did I do that? This is a great question for many reasons. One could be a personal one. That is, how do you access that history? Beyond the simple numbers of 12.5 millions that were transshipped, or 20 millions, or whoever, and of course you have the writers like Toni Morrison and others who have been able to show us different lights. But how do you, as a, you know, how do you access that story? The other reason, one of the other reasons, is because I situate my work also in the imaginary. That means when you have some political understanding of ecological issues, including the Anthropocene narratives, these politics are also accompanied by a certain imaginary of the world and the earth. And in my research, when I read people like Paul Crutzen, one of the big promoter of Anthropocene, people like Bruno Latour, Michel Serres, or even James Lovelock, one with Lynn Margulis Gullin, who created this Gaia hypothesis. Many of them carry these images of the world, this image of the world as a ship, and a ship that resembles in many ways Noah's Ark. And this is the imaginary in which they work with. Thinking from the Caribbean, there is a different imaginary. Now, the imaginary is not the image of, is the precondition of the image. What will allow you to make sense of what you say, what you do, and the way you move around the world. And in wanting to suggest this decolonial ecology, this shift, I also needed to translate and make this imaginary felt, especially to the French public, who has been in many ways oblivious to the story of slavery. Talking about slavery to many people, especially in the media, is a call for repentance, and is a call for, for criticizing French, being anti-Republican, and so on and so forth. And actually, it worked because many ecological activists or parties or people that I met after my book came up to me and say, "Hey, Malcolm, you also showed us some of that story," and some even say, "Well, nobody has written about this before." And I'm like, no. There's many books about the story of slavery in France. It's just that you have not been able to see that. And talking to a lot of environmental activists, I knew that I had this goal to also bring them to that other story. And yeah, and so the reference to Le Soleil d'Afrique, the sun of Africa, is actually the name of one of his ships. Maybe I could read one of his passage so that people get an idea of what I mean by these. Okay, so I'm going to read the story about this one ship called Espérance, which can be translated in English as hope. And I hope you can understand my English. Yeah. Embarked right from inland and torn away from everything familiar to them, suffering faces flow down into the Gulf of Guinea. In Ouidah, present-day Benin, eyes thrown about in barracks, look out through the cracks for an unlikely happy horizon. At the end of 1749, 227 seekers of light were enchained in the belly of the Espérance, a ship from Le Havre. In the hold's Atlantic hell, behind all the fear, the growing despair, the suicidal desires of the dreams of revenge, a muffled heartbeat holds on to the hope of running aground on welcoming land. On February 15th, 1750, the Espérance was wrecked off Le Vauclin in Martinique, a town in Martinique. Debarked onto these unknown sands, the Espérance and 177 shipwrecked were already searching through the cracks of the hills for the possible grounds, for the possible openings of the world. So this is the kind of story that I tell at the start of each chapter. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I want to respond, but we should move on to our next question, which is quite a juicy one, from John Fish Hodgson. Sorry. Oh, Romy, I wonder whether Malcolm and or you distinguish between ethics and politics here. I'm thinking of Lewis R. Gordon's contention following Fanon that politics precedes ethics, in the sense that political action and conditions make ethical encounters possible or not.
So a quick answer is yes. Actually, one of the issues I had with environmental ethics was the fact that sometimes people like James Bayard Carlicott or the Environmental Ethics Journal would not account for the political condition from where the situation takes place, or even the political conditions of who can talk about the environment or not. Henry David Thoreau in the mid-19th century could write. He could buy a land. Yeah, well, he could get a land from his friend Emerson and so on and so forth. And so sometimes this is, yeah. So the short answer is yes. I think there is a need to account for the political conditions of the actors, of the agents, in thinking about ethics, of course. So there's a distinction, but I think they should be thought together as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, in brief, we don't want to make the move of skipping all the very difficult work that needs to be done first, in terms of thinking about politics and the political as, you know, domain of antagonism, of struggle, and of location and resources. And so, for example, it's very difficult to establish living in right relation or something like with the land and each other, or something like a decolonial ethics when you have mining companies who can access that and will just move you from it. So yeah, that's I would also agree. Next question is one that I also wanted to ask. So great, all the questions are coming thick and fast now. Ooh, exciting 10 last minutes. Okay, I'm curious about whether and how you draw on the work of Sylvia Wynter and Christina Sharp. I felt like Sylvia Wynter, I was kept being like, where's she gonna get her a big juicy section? And she didn't really, although I felt like you two were very close at lots of points. So yeah, whether and how you draw on the work of Sylvia Wynter and Christina Sharp.
So I could have definitely make more reference to the work of Sylvia Wynter. Although I do mention her in the equivalent to matrigenesis, which is the metamorphosis, which I also I refer to Sylvia Wynter works here. But but I think the most interesting point or inspiration I get from Sylvia Wynter is from her discussion of the human and the human as an occupied territory. And I use her discussion of the human as occupied territory and make an analogy of the term ecology. And to me, echoing Wynter's work, the word ecology is also an occupied territory, in a sense that, and that goes back to the first question, politically, some people have been able to speak and occupy the space where knowledge is produced and talked about and discourses are formulated about ecology. And the issue, and I've thought some of my friends, I say, well, Malcolm, ecology is a white thing. Why do you talk about this? Why don't you just get rid of the word and leave it be? And I think what I suggest is, in a way, reclaiming that term from those that have been excluded from this. And regarding Christina Sharp's work in the wake of slavery, there are many similarities. I mean, I think it's a great work, obviously, and I do when I'm trying to think of really what slavery was, and the way slavery has been able to turn, I mean, what slavery did to women, and especially what it means to women when the child that they bear becomes a slave. And this, you know, but so this is some of the reference I make to these works, but also to other work, including recent works by Norman Ajari and many others. But I think there's room for more, and I know that Romy also is working on that, so maybe there will be also more avenues to be explored, and I'm very happy to be in discussion with them.
I was kind of like, oh, I've still got a niche. Yeah. And I mean, your grasp of a range of figures and sites is really staggering. I mean, it's almost encyclopedic. So I think you do a great job of covering a lot of people. And yeah, okay, so maybe I will read. Oh, we've got 7 minutes. Okay, so just a quick. This is Joanna. I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, Joanna. Geophone. Thanks you both for this great conversation. You're welcome. Just a quick question about the Anthropocene. Malcom, what do you think of the Anthropocene narrative? Do you think it can be shaped in a way that does not overlook questions related to colonialism? Or does a whole new narrative need to be told? And then maybe after you answer that, I'll ask the final two together.
Yeah. So, quick answer. No, I don't think there's a way that Anthropocene narrative cannot overlook colonialism, because it's been shaped in a way, it's been shaped in a way to overlook colonialism. So, a quick history. The term Anthropocene has been mainly promoted by a bunch of chemical scientists, including Paul Crutzen. And Paul Crutzen is a citizen of the Netherlands, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Now, in most of his work, he never mentioned the story of colonization or slavery. But bearing in mind that the Kingdom of the Netherlands is a post-colonial and post-imperial, post-slavery country that had colonies in the Caribbean, in South America, in Suriname, in South Africa, and in Indonesia. So this country has colonized almost many countries on all continents, but yet when it comes to talk about the history of man, quote unquote, man on earth, they felt no need to acknowledge the domination and destructions of the ecosystem and the people as well. So it's really, you cannot save it. Regardless what Dipesh Chakrabarty said, I don't think you can. However, I don't think the need is for another narrative that would mirror the Anthropocene. For example, in my book, I talked about different ways of naming this era, and one of the ways I argue for is the Negrocene, which to me is the opposite of the Anthropocene. But the task, I think, is not to be more universalist than the universalist himself. It's to get to provide a plurality of terms. The problem here is that one term and one term only, the Anthropocene, takes over all other ways of naming and thinking about this era. And I believe that there is a need to have a plurality of terms, including Plantagenocene, Capitalocene, and Chucholocene, that could be used.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to ask the three questions. Don't worry if you can't answer them all comprehensively. So this is Sophia Watney. Forgive me, Sophia. Thank you. Returning to the issues of not being extractive, something I also struggle with. How do you both relate your work to or work with contemporary social movements? The next question is from Faris Sarah. Came to mind when you mentioned how people were uprooted from their motherland and cannot go back to their own land. Do you think there could be parallels drawn between this and the Palestinian occupation? And then from Olivier, Lozano, is your work, in your work you talk about the importance of a decolonial ecology. Is that ecology related to what some native peoples know as relational? ontologies, and yeah, in Mexico, sorry, just trying to read this quickly. Foreigners, dispossession, and extractivism of nature have been synonymous with progress and modernity. In your work, what are the presence of these themes?
Okay, well, I'll try to answer all of them. So how do, yeah, contemporary social movements. So part of my work, which is not shown in this book, is studying and working with environmental groups and movements in the Caribbean, including Martinique and Guadeloupe. And so, I mean, you know, sometimes you think that some of the, you know, you write, you invented words, you invented concepts, you know, I'm in constant dialogue with what's going on. That's one of the ways in which I relate my work. And I'm this politics of encounter that I often in my work, I try to practice it in my life. So that means I go and talk with many people, many NGOs, many students also, but mainly, and one of the things I didn't say is that I also co-founded an NGO that works on ecological issues in the Overseas Department of France and the surrounding regions. And we also want to induce change, create more just, ecologically friendly societies. So it wasn't enough for me to say, yeah, I've written a book and I'm going to stay there. But how can I contribute to empower people to do the same, to engage with issues, to find and to create their own solutions on how we can live, how can inhabit the land. That's also a different ways. To the second question, could there be parallels drawn between this and the Palestinian occupation in terms of the uprootedness? Evidently, evidently, from the little I know, evidently, but I think I would rather have someone you know, from Palestine that would tell you more about it. But the evidence, and in fact, in many of my interviews that I made with social movement, environmental movements in Martinique and Guadeloupe, sometimes the case of Palestine came up as a way to, so the parallel is also drawn from them too. And then the last question. So yes, decolonial ecology, is it related to what Native people call relational ontologies? Definitely, and there are many ways to formulate that. But decolonial ecology is not just an ontology. It's ontology is part of this, but you need to think of politics, you need to think of aesthetics, and the imaginary. And all the terms, foreignness, dispossession, extractivism, they are all part of my work, in the sense that when I talk about the matricide is also the fact that you create people that that metaphorically are forever foreign to their land. And how do you change that? And yeah, and I know that the time is short, but these are some of the terms that I've basically tried to work in my book, but also that have accompanied me in my life. Myself Martinican, I grew up in Martinique, and I grew up in these societies. My family still live there, and these issues of what it means to live there, what it means to really, when you are on an island that is covered by banana plantations, and you are being told that this is the only way you can have an existence on Earth is by being inside a banana plantation on a marginalized space of what you call France. When you see France, you never think of Martinique. But even French people sometimes see Martinique as some sort of, you know, accessory except when it comes to think of ecology, when you know that 80% of the biodiversity of France is located in the surrounding regions. Now you find an interest. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you, Malcolm. And I popped a link to, I hope that's okay, your NGO in the chat. It may have got lost. I can put it there again. And just another thing that I would just add is that a lot of what you're doing seems related to relational ontologies, but is also centering a Black ecological tradition, which is really crucial, and particularly the Caribbean. But so just want to uplift that. I think we are at time.